In Matthew, beginning at the 13th verse. And Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. And no one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bare bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so they may see your good works and give glory to your Father which is in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven, but whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Here ends the gospel for the day. Please be seated. Not too long ago, there was a woman on one of the morning news shows that had reached her 104th birthday. And the interviewer was asking her about her long and wonderful life. And then he asked, of course, the question that you would always ask. As you reach 104, what is the greatest thing about being 104? And this woman, being a very sound mind, without pausing at all, she said, "I think the greatest thing about being 104 is I don't have any peer pressure." We talk a lot about peer pressure, and we wouldn't expect somebody who was 104 to have a lot of peer pressure. The one thing that we really talk about when we talk about peer pressure is our children. That's immediately who we think of. Because one of the things that we know is that the kind of people that you choose to be your friends kind of have some kind of effect on how your life is going to go. And it is important to kind of hang with the right people. You hang with the wrong people, you feel your kids could get into a lot of trouble. So pick your friends carefully. We all understand that. What we don't understand is that adults, just as much as children, are affected by peer pressure. Yes, the people that you associate a lot will determine something about your temperament, about your worldview, about how you approach life, and how you interpret the things that happen to you and others. David Green, who is the narrator for Morning Edition on National Public Radio, was talking about peer review the other day, and he said peer review is kind of a two-edged sword. Peer pressure can be very positive. It can be positive about children. Academically, it's really important to place your child with somebody who is achieving academically well, because that will give them some kind of challenge. In terms of being athletes, as far as their extracurricular activities, what they decide to do in terms of working with their friends is going to influence. And yes, even adults are affected positively by peer pressure. If you see somebody else being very careful about recycling, you probably will kind of get the spirit too. If you see some other people getting involved in community affairs, and yes, even in church affairs, when they become very excited about it, it has a tendency to pass off on you too. And, of course, David Green said there are the negative effects of peer pressure. said the children are easily affected by other people, particularly those that are challenging their parental instructions. It seems exciting to do something that you're not supposed to do, as it is with adults. And you can see in communities who is affected by positive peer pressure, because those that are positively affected will have much nicer looking lawns, take better care of their houses, and generally be better citizens. Isn't that interesting? Todd Roger in the Harvard Kennedy School talked about peer pressure, and he said what is interesting about peer pressure is that if you're trying to accomplish something positive and working with others in doing so, if you work with somebody that is slightly better or somewhat better than you are, it has a very positive reinforcing effect. However, he said, if you work with somebody who you just can't possibly catch up to or emulate, it'll probably have a negative effect. For instance, if you are trying to develop as a runner and you pair yourself with an Olympic runner, you're probably going to be discouraged right off the bat. So when you choose somebody to emulate, do not make it somebody that is so overachieving that you can't possibly hope to emulate them. It has a negative effect. Now the question is, what happens then if we apply this to our religious and moral lives? Because that is what Jesus was dealing with in our text today. He says the scribes and the Pharisees are enforcing a lot of peer pressure on you. But the end of this text today says something very interesting, and I'm sure you didn't catch it when we were reading it. But it said, unless your righteousness exceeds the scribes and the Pharisees, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. Now that gets a little scary, because the Pharisees, contrary to some of the bad press we in the church give them, they were people that you would probably like in your neighborhood and would even like in your church. The Pharisees and the Sadducees were not bad people. They knew the rules and they did them. They were the ones that came to church regularly, came to the temple regularly on the Sabbath. They didn't miss, because that was not allowed. They were the ones that tithed their 10%. They were just all according to the law, and they did it. They were not disruptive, except they made themselves out to be so perfect that they were discouraging a lot of people in terms of their faith. And sometimes we do that in the church today. We make ourselves out to be so good and so much a part of the elite that we discourage others from entering in. It has a negative effect. What Jesus was saying in his text today was not trying to discourage us or make us give up with the statement, unless your righteousness exceeds the scribes and the Pharisees. What he was trying to do was to say, I have a new measurement. I have a new measurement. And the problem with the scribes and the Pharisees is just with so many church members, they look down at others to a point where they chase other people away. Or they make some incredible demands on them they can't possibly live up to. That's going to be one of the focuses on our midweek Lenten series, Saints Behaving Badly. All these people that we regard as saints were not always living according to the law. And in some cases, those made them to be better saints once they converted, once they found the light, once they belonged to Jesus Christ. So what do Christians look like? What are characteristics of Christians? Jesus only has two today. He says, first of all, you're salt. That's what you are. You're salt. Now, the people in that day understood it. We don't regard salt as that precious. But in the Old Testament, it was pretty precious. There were four major characteristics, or four things that salt did. One was used for sacrifice because it was expensive. It was used for seasoning to give flavor to whatever was eaten, to preserve, to make foods last a longer time, and in some cases for purification. So Jesus was saying, the life of a Christian, if your salt, is a life of sacrifice. It's a one of seasoning. It's one of preservation of the good and purification, making more holy. Okay, well now that makes sense. Jesus did not say, go to Salt and Light University and get a degree in saltiness. He didn't say to go to a rabbi and have him place his hands on your head and pray for saltiness. He didn't ask you to meditate 30 minutes a day so you can get in touch with your inner saltiness. He simply said, be salt. Be one that sacrifices, one that seasons, one that preserves, and one that purifies. Isn't that a great way to picture a Christian? That is part of what exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, because they were more in tune with just observing laws and doing certain things and keeping a log in what was doing right and what was doing wrong. But one of the other things we have to understand about salt is salt really in reality doesn't have much value in and of itself. It has use and value only when it gives something to something else. When it was applied to the food, it became exceedingly precious. Value in salt is always in application to something else. One of the things that I do very often is I let people in the church, they come and want to see this church, and I ask them if they want to see the insides, and usually they say yes. And then I always ask them the question, well, are you involved with some kind of congregation? And one of the things that's very interesting is very often I'm told, well, no, we really don't belong to a congregation. We don't attend anything. But we can be Christians on our own. And the problem with that is that Jesus always saw Christianity or righteousness in God's eyes in terms of what you contributed to life of somebody else. It was not just a simple thing that you kept yourself. The second thing that Jesus said is characteristic of a Christian is you're a light. You shine. You provide energy and you give warmth and comfort. The children dealt with that just a little while ago. Once again, you don't have to go to a university to shine your light. You don't have to meditate to shine your light. You don't have to read great literature to shine your life. Simply get involved in the nature of Jesus Christ, and your light will shine with warmth and encouragement. And see, this is where the righteousness and the scribes and the Pharisees didn't quite make it. Because there wasn't a lot of compassion, there wasn't a lot of looking after other people. To be a light, Jesus says, is not to hide it under a bushel, but to let it shine. Be open and honest instead of hiding in the dark. To offer warmth and encouragement instead of being cold and discouraging. Being an energy to others to permit Christ to enter their lives, so let your light shine. And you've got to have that light before it can really be of value to anybody else. Interesting little story about Gandhi, the great ruler of India. There was a woman who had a child, young daughter, who she said was kind of addicted to sugar, to sweets. And she came to Gandhi and she said, "Can you cure my child of her addiction to sweets?" And Gandhi thought for a while and said, well, give me 3 weeks. Give me 3 weeks and come back, and I'll help her break her addiction to sweets. So the woman came back after 3 weeks, and Gandhi took the daughter and started working with her and cured her of her addiction to sugar. But the woman came back to Gandhi and said, when I came to you, one of the things that confused me was when I came to you and I asked you if you could help my daughter with this problem, you said to come back in 3 weeks. Why did it need 3 weeks before you could talk to her? And he said, it took 3 weeks for me to get over my addiction to sweets. And only when I got over my addiction could I help someone else. Be a light. Be salt. Unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, that is simply a note-taking, simply obeying laws, simply just existing with certain rules and regulations. That's not the kind of that's not the kind of witness that I want. It is not the kind of image I want to present. It is not the kind of peer pressure that I want you to instill on others. Unless your righteousness exceeds the scribes and the Pharisees, to be the light and the salt, you cannot enter the kingdom. Amen.